Okay, let's just pause for a second and look at the sheer absurdity of where we are right now.
Yeah, let's set the scene.
Right. It is September 2025. You are in Silicon Valley. The sun is shining. The Teslas are driving themselves all over the place. Everything looks completely clean and futuristic.
Very utopian.
Exactly. You are standing outside a room with very heavy closed doors.
And you probably had to sign a massive non-disclosure agreement just to get into the hallway.
You definitely did. And inside that room is Peter Thiel.
Right.
We are talking about one of the most powerful, enigmatic, and frankly unsettling figures in the history of tech. I mean, the guy who co-founded PayPal, the guy who essentially made Facebook possible, and the guy who built Palantir.
Palantir being the ultimate surveillance tool.
Right. So he is standing there in front of the absolute masters of the universe, and he puts a slide up on the screen. And the slide doesn't say, Q3 earnings or AI synergy.
Oh, no, it definitely doesn't say that. The slide says the antichrist.
The antichrist. I mean, come on. If this was a movie script, I would send it right back.
It's too much.
I'd say it's way too on the nose. It feels like we're living in a satire.
It really does feel like a glitch in the simulation, doesn't it? But this is real. These 4 speeches actually happened. And what we are going to do today in this deep dive is try to peel back the layers of this, I don't even know if I want to call it a philosophy.
Yeah, what is it really?
It feels more like a warning shot or, maybe a sales pitch.
And that is the big question we need to answer today. Is he a prophet, or is he just a snake oil salesman selling us the cure for a disease he essentially invented?
That's the core of it.
So, for the listener, we are working off a couple of really fascinating sources today. The primary one is a breakdown by attorney and podcaster Ron Chapman, who analyzed the reports of these leaked speeches.
Chapman really gets into the weeds of Thiel's intellectual arguments.
He does. But we also have this other source, a very jagged, highly critical fragment referred to as the Testo Incolado, which specifically highlights a broadcast from Radio-MANNADORO. And this source just rips the whole Thiel spectacle apart.
And that second source is absolutely crucial for this deep dive, because if you just listen to Thiel, you might get sucked right into the gravity of his intellect. He is very, very good at sounding like the smartest guy in the room.
He really is.
But the critical view from Radio-MANNADORO suggests that this is all just a massive distraction. It's what they call the Kali Yuga of tech.
The age of conflict and total absurdity.
Exactly. An era where
Yeah.
billionaires basically cosplay as theologians while the actual world burns around them.
So let's set the stage a bit more. We have a central tension here that I just can't get out of my head. Peter Thiel is the founder of Palantir. And Palantir is, for all intents and purposes, the all-seeing eye.
It's the ultimate data integration company used by the CIA, the FBI, the military.
It is literally the tool of the surveillance state.
It is the architecture of control.
So the architect of control is giving secret speeches warning us that the Antichrist is a system of total control.
Yeah, the irony is thick.
Is he the arsonist warning us about the fire? Or is he the firefighter who only knows how the fire starts because he was the one playing with matches in the basement?
That is the exact paradox we are going to live in for the next hour or so. We really need to explore the philosophy he's peddling, this idea of the catacon and the new elite.
But we also need to look at the man himself.
Yes, because you cannot separate the message from the messenger here, especially when the messenger is seemingly, well, high on his own supply.
And we are definitely going to get into the high part later, because the critical sources point out some very weird connections to psychedelics and biotech that make this whole thing feel even more like a bad trip.
It really does.
But let's start with the basics. Who is Peter Thiel, really? I know he's a billionaire, I know he's famous, but why does he have this aura? Why do these tech elites listen to him like he's an oracle?
Well, the resume is frankly undeniable. If you look at the last 20 years of the internet, his fingerprints are on the throttle of almost every major shift. He founded PayPal,
Which gave us the infamous PayPal mafia. Elon Musk, Reid Hoffman, all these massive players came out of that one single company.
Exactly. And there is a story there that tells you everything you need to know about his personality. He famously ousted Elon Musk from the CEO role at PayPal.
He fired Elon.
Yeah.
I feel like people always forget this detail.
It was a total coup. Musk was on vacation. I think he was actually on his honeymoon or traveling to a wedding, and Thiel and the board moved against him. Thiel took over.
Wow.
It was ruthless. It was purely strategic. It wasn't, let's hug it out and talk about our feelings. It was, I can run this better than you, so you are gone.
So he is not afraid to decapitate the king to take the throne.
Not at all. And then, of course, the Facebook investment. Back in 2004, he gave Mark Zuckerberg $500,000. That was the very first outside money.
Without that check, Facebook might have just died in a Harvard dorm room.
Right. He saw the potential of social networking before almost anyone else on the planet.
And then comes Palantir, which, by the way, is named after the Seeing Stones in Lord of the Rings.
Which is such an incredibly telling choice. If you know Tolkien's lore, the Palantir allows you to see across great distances. It allows you to see your enemies.
But, and this is the part these tech guys always seem to miss, the Palantir also corrupted the people who used it.
Exactly. It allowed the Dark Lord, Sauron, to manipulate what they saw.
Right. Denethor goes completely mad because he looks into the stone and only sees doom. He sees the overwhelming power of the enemy and just loses all hope.
Precisely. And here is Thiel, literally naming his company after that cursed object. And he co-founded it with Alex Karp.
We have to talk about Karp for a second because the dynamic between those two is bizarre.
Karp is the guy who looks like a mad scientist, right? The wild hair, always wearing tracksuits, or those puffy vests.
Yeah, he's often described as zany. He has a PhD in philosophy. He's a self-described socialist, an eccentric cross-country skier, and he runs the most lethal data analytics company on Earth.
It's like a comic book villain duo. You have the cold, calculating mastermind and the chaotic, eccentric genius. It really is. And this brings us right to Thiel's background, which explains a lot of that coldness. His biography is literally titled The Contrarian.
But that's a very polite way of putting it, isn't it?
It is. Chapman notes in his analysis that Thiel was born to a German family, but he spent a very significant part of his childhood in Africa.
In Africa. Doing what exactly?
His father worked for a uranium mining company.
Whoa. Okay, uranium mining. That is not exactly take your kid to workday at a normal office.
No, it's not. And think about what that exposes a young child to. When you are living near a uranium mine in Africa in the 70s or 80s, you are not seeing the polite, sanitized facade of Western democracy.
Right, you aren't seeing lectures on human rights and due process.
You are seeing raw extraction. You are seeing the mechanics of power in their most naked, brutal form. You see the colonizer and the colonized. You see the strong taking from the weak.
So he learns early on that power is not about voting or debates. It's about who controls the resources and who has the guns.
Exactly. It gave him a deeply cynical view of the world. He views power as something raw. So when he speaks about politics today, he isn't talking about consensus building. He is talking about who holds the weapon.
Which brings us right back to that heavy-doored room in September 2025. The uranium kid is all grown up, he is a billionaire, and he's giving a secret speech about the antichrist. Let's really dig into this. Chapman calls the use of the word antichrist a culling method.
Yes.
That sounds predatory. What does he mean by a culling method?
It's a filter. Think about the classic Nigerian prince emails scam.
Oh, the ones that say, "Dear sir or madam, I have $50 million trapped in a bank for you."
Right, and they are always written with terrible grammar, weird capitalization, and just ridiculous premises. For years, people thought, wow, these scammers are just stupid. But they aren't stupid. The typos are there on purpose.
Wait, really? Why would you want your scam to look stupid?
To filter out the smart people. If you are a critical thinker, you see the typos and you delete the email immediately, you are a waste of the scammer's time because you'll figure it out eventually. Ah, I see.
They only want the people who are gullible enough to miss the errors. They want the true believers from day one.
That is actually diabolical. So you were saying Thiel's doing the exact same thing with his audience?
In a way, yes. By titling his speech The Antichrist, he is intentionally filtering out the standard, secular, coastal elites. He is filtering out the people who will roll their eyes and say, oh, he's found Jesus, he's gone crazy.
He doesn't want the skeptics in the room. He wants the people who are willing to suspend disbelief.
He wants the people who are curious enough, or maybe desperate enough, to look past the crazy label. He wants the room to be filled with people who are ready to hear something radical. It's a way of selecting his disciples.
Okay, so he clears the room of the normies.
Yeah.
What is he actually telling the people who stay? I'm assuming he is not just reading passages from the book of Revelation.
No, not literally. He is using it as a grand political metaphor. For Thiel, the Antichrist isn't a red guy with horns and a pitchfork. It is a specific political structure. It is the concept of one-world governance. So globalism, taken to its absolute extreme.
Extreme globalism. A system where there is no exit. A singular, totalizing power structure that controls the entire planet. And to explain how we get there, he drags out a very obscure Greek term from the second epistle to the Thessalonians.
The Kitikon.
Yes, the Kitikon.
Okay, you need to break this down for me. Explain it like I am 5 years old. Or maybe 5 years old and terrified.
Okay, I can do that. Imagine a massive dam holding back a terrible flood. The flood is chaos. It's the end of the world. It's the apocalypse. The Kitikon is the dam. It is literally translated as the restrainer. Its only job is to hold back the water.
Okay, that sounds good so far. We like dams. We don't want to drown in the apocalypse.
We do like dams. But here is the problem, Thiel points out. If the flood gets higher and stronger, let's say because we invent nuclear weapons or super intelligent AI, you have to build the dam higher. You have to make it thicker.
Right.
You have to give the people running the dam total unquestioned control over the water and the land around it.
And eventually the dam gets so big it blocks out the sun.
Exactly. Eventually, the dam becomes so massive, so controlling, and so powerful that living behind the dam is just as bad as the flood itself. The restrainer accumulates so much power to stop the bad guy that it actually becomes the bad guy.
That is the paradox.
Yeah.
The thing that saves you eventually enslaves you.
That's it. Thiel is arguing that in our modern world, we are actively building a Katishon. We are building a massive surveillance state, a massive global government, ostensibly to save us from destroying ourselves. But that system will inevitably turn into the antichrist, a total tyranny from which you cannot escape.
This connects directly to his point about the year 1945, right?
Yeah.
The year he says everything changed forever.
Yes, the year of the bomb. Thiel argues that the invention of the atomic bomb fundamentally broke the human psyche.
Because for the very first time in history, we could push a button and everyone dies.
Exactly. Before 1945, you could have a terrible war. You could have Genghis Khan or Napoleon. Millions of people might die. But the human species as a whole would survive. The grass would grow back. But after 1945, we entered the era of mutually assured destruction. We realized we could technically delete the entire planet in an afternoon.
Chapman calls this a permanent existential crisis.
And when you live in a permanent crisis, you are willing to accept permanent solutions. Thiel argues that because Armageddon is technically plausible now, humanity is terrified, we are vibrating with fear, and because we are terrified, we are highly susceptible to a very specific sales pitch.
We can keep you safe.
Exactly. The pitch is, the world is incredibly dangerous. There are nukes, there are bioweapons, there are rogue terrorists. But if you give us total control, if you let us watch every email, track every movement, monitor every single financial transaction, we can ensure that the button never gets pushed.
And the ultimate trap is that the logic actually holds up. I mean, I don't want a nuclear war. And if you tell me the only way to definitely stop a nuclear war is a global government, a lot of people would sign that contract without reading the fine print.
That is exactly why it is the Antichrist. Because it seduces you. It doesn't conquer you with a sword, it conquers you with a promise of safety. Thiel warns that this system won't look like a villain. It won't be wearing a black cape.
It won't look like Sauron sitting on a dark throne.
No. It will look like a super humanitarian. It will look like a peace bringer. It will sell itself as, we are the government and we are here to help. It will use the language of empathy. It will say, we are doing this for the children. We are doing this for the planet.
Chapman had a really funny line about this in his analysis. Something about a T-shirt.
Yeah, he said he'd much prefer a T-shirt that just says Helvetica rather than one that says, I'm here to help.
Because at least the font Helvetica is honest about what it is.
Right. When a massive global superpower says, I'm here to help, you should probably check your wallet and your passport. The argument is that the humanitarian disguise is the most effective camouflage for tyranny.
Wow.
Think about it. If you oppose them, you aren't seen as a freedom fighter. You are painted as a monster who hates safety. You are a monster who wants the world to burn.
That is a brilliant and terrifying trap. It pathologizes dissent. If you disagree with the surveillance state, you must be crazy or dangerous to society.
Precisely. And this leads us to the other major pillar of his argument, which is stagnation. This is a very classic Thielism.
The idea that we basically stopped inventing things.
The stagnation thesis. Thiel argues that since about 1969, since the moon landing and Woodstock, we haven't seen real technological progress in the physical world.
I always struggle a bit with this one. I mean, I am talking to you over a high-speed internet connection. I have a literal supercomputer in my pocket. We have mRNA vaccines. How can he stand there and say there's no progress?
He makes a sharp distinction between bits and atoms. We have had massive exponential progress in bits, information, software, entertainment, the internet. But in atoms, the actual physical stuff of the world, we are stuck.
So the physical world is frozen.
Look around. Do we fly faster than we did in 1970? No, actually, the Concorde is gone, so we fly slower. Is housing cheaper and easier to build? No, it's a crisis. Is energy too cheap to meter? Definitely not.
So we have incredibly realistic video games, but our actual quality of life in the physical world is flatlining.
Or arguably getting worse. He asks his audience, are you actually richer than your parents were at your age? Are you healthier? Is your life expectancy shooting up? For a huge number of people, the answer is no. And he connects this lack of physical growth directly to the environmental narrative.
Now this gets controversial. He is not a flat-out climate denier, is he?
He is more of a narrative skeptic. He doesn't necessarily deny the physics of carbon in the atmosphere, but he argues that the environmental narrative is being weaponized by the elite to throttle growth.
Weaponize how? How does that work?
Think about it as a massive zero-sum game. If you believe the economic pie cannot get any bigger because the planet's resources are strictly limited, then for me to have more, you have to have less.
Right. If everybody in India and Africa starts consuming electricity and meat like Americans do, the ecosystem collapses.
Exactly. So, according to Thiel, the Western elite uses environmentalism as a tool to tell the developing world, sorry, the party is over. You can't have what we have. It's bad for the planet.
So it pulls up the ladder.
It pulls up the ladder entirely. It keeps the U.S. and Europe on top, and it keeps the rest of the world in check.
It's a way of enforcing a global hierarchy under the noble guise of saving the Earth.
That is the accusation he levels. And he points to nuclear power as the smoking gun for this theory. Nuclear power is zero carbon. It is incredibly energy dense. If the elites were truly genuinely panicked about carbon but wanted to maintain human prosperity, we would be building nuclear plants on every single corner.
But we aren't.
Yeah.
We're actually shutting them down in places like Germany.
Thiel argues that's because nuclear power would solve the scarcity problem. And if you solve scarcity, the elites lose their leverage. Energy scarcity is a primary tool of control. If energy is cheap and practically infinite, people become too independent. They don't need the state as much.
That is incredibly dark. It suggests a level of malevolence in the system that is hard to wrap your head around.
It connects to the sheer hypocrisy Chapman mentions. You have figures like Greta Thunberg or Leonardo DiCaprio, the avatars of this movement. Thiel despises them.
Because Leo flies a private jet across the world to accept an award for an environmental documentary.
It's the modern let them eat bugs mentality. The elites preach stagnation and austerity for the masses, you know, the whole you will own nothing and be happy trope, while they themselves live in a world of absolute abundance. And Thiel warns that a society without growth becomes a shark tank.
Because if the pie isn't growing, politics basically becomes war.
Exactly. If we can't create new wealth through innovation, the only way for me to get rich is to steal yours. Politics becomes a zero-sum death match. And when politics gets that nasty and that polarized, everyday people get scared. And when people get scared,
They want the antichrist. They want the strong man to step in and save them.
you see how it all loops together perfectly?
Yeah.
The fear, the stagnation, the surveillance. It creates a perfect storm for authoritarianism.
Okay, I'm with you on the logic. As a philosophical framework, it is terrifyingly coherent. But now we really have to address the elephant in the room, the Frankenstein paradox.
Or, as some call it, the Dr. Strangelove paradox.
Right. Why is Peter Thiel, the literal man who built the surveillance state, warning us about it? It feels like the guy who invented high fructose corn syrup giving a TED Talk on the dangers of the obesity epidemic.
It is the ultimate contradiction of his entire persona. Chapman tries to explain this with his new elite theory.
Break that down for me. What's the new elite?
The theory is that the old elite, the Clintons, the Bushes, the traditional political and media establishment, is rotting away from the inside. Chapman mentions the Epstein scandal as a prime symptom of this deep moral decay. The old guard is compromised, they are weak, and they are rapidly losing their grip on culture.
And nature abhors a vacuum.
Right. So who is stepping in to fill that power void? The tech CEOs. The new elite. You have Thiel, you have Elon Musk, you have these techno kings. Chapman actually mentions a detail about Musk that is just, well, it's in the source material. He says Musk has people calling him daddy while he launches rockets.
Daddy.
Ugh.
Please tell me that is a metaphor.
In the internet age, daddy is a slang term for a dominant, protective, almost patriarchal figure. But it highlights the literal cult-like devotion these guys inspire. They aren't just businessmen selling products. They are world builders. They are messianic figures to their followers.
So Thiel sees himself as part of this new ascending class of kings.
Yes. And Chapman theorizes that Thiel is trying to act as a whisperer to this new power structure. He is trying to educate a small, select group of philosopher kings. He compares it to Marcus Aurelius.
The Roman emperor who wrote Meditations.
Exactly. Marcus Aurelius famously had a servant follow him around during his military triumphs, and the servant's only job was to whisper, "You are only a man," into his ear to keep him humble. Chapman thinks Thiel is trying to create a class of people who can act as that whisperer to the AI, to the surveillance state.
He wants people smart enough to tell the supercomputer no.
Or at least people smart enough to restrain the system before it goes rogue. This is the Frankenstein analogy. Thiel knows he has built a monster. Palantir aggregates data in a way that makes the very concept of privacy obsolete.
There was a stat about Facebook in the materials.
Yes, Chapman notes that Facebook has something like 50,000 data points on the average user, but you only need about 5,000 data points to predict someone's behavior with terrifying mathematical accuracy. They know you're going to get divorced before you even know you're unhappy.
That is horrifying.
It is. Thiel helped rig this entire system. He knows exactly how rigged it is. And now, the noble interpretation of these speeches is that he's looking at his creation and thinking, I cannot destroy this. It is too valuable and too entrenched. But maybe, just maybe, I can teach a few people how to leash it before it completely eats democracy.
I have to be honest, that sounds a little bit convenient.
How so?
Well, it paints him as this tragic, burdened philosopher. Oh, I accidentally created the ultimate spy tool, and now I must heroically burden myself with the wisdom to control it. Meanwhile, Palantir is actively signing billion-dollar contracts with the military and intelligence agencies. He is cashing the checks, isn't he?
He absolutely is cashing those checks, and that is the friction you cannot ignore here. You are right to be skeptical. Is he Dr. Frankenstein trying to cage the monster? Or is he just the guy selling tickets to see the monster rampage through the village?
Exactly. Because if I am terrified of a surveillance state, which he says is the antichrist, why on earth should I trust the architect of that state to save me from it? It really feels like the arson is selling me a fire extinguisher.
And that is exactly where our second source comes crashing in. This is the Testo Incolado fragment, heavily featuring the broadcast from Radio-MANNADORO. And I want to warn you, this source is not polite. It does not buy the Noble Philosopher Act for a single second.
Yeah, this source actually calls the speeches dog bullocks, which I assume is not a compliment in any language.
It is definitively not a compliment. This perspective argues that all this high-minded talk about the Antichrist, the Catacon, and Second Thessalonians is just a massive, calculated distraction. Radio-MANNADORO calls it a vicious, circular, hacked logos engagement trap.
That is a mouthful. Hacked logos. Break that down for me.
Logos is Greek for word or reason. It's the basis of logic. In this context, the critic is saying that the very language Thiel is using has been hacked. The debate is rigged from the start.
Rigged how?
Think about it like sitting down at a casino game. If you sit down at the table and start debating Thiel on his terms, if you start talking about the Catacon and the Antichrist and theology, you have already lost. Because he has set the rules of the conversation. He has defined the complex terms to make himself look like the genius in the room.
So the critic from Radio-MANNADORO is saying, don't debate the philosophy. It's a trap. Look at the money.
Precisely. The critic argues that all this high-minded intellectualizing is a smokescreen. It's an old psyop. They literally call these guys snake oil sellers.
Snake oil sellers everywhere. So the whole thing is a grift.
Money for power. Money for survival. Money for war. The source paints these tech billionaires not as burdened philosophers, but as parasites. They create the problem, the loss of privacy, the fear, the instability, and then they turn around and sell you the solution.
And conveniently, the solution is always them.
The solution is their software, their security apparatus, their visionary leadership. It creates a closed loop where they win either way. If the world gets safer, they make money. If the world gets more dangerous, they sell more security tools and make even more money.
It is the ultimate hedge against the apocalypse.
And here is where it gets really, as the source says, creepy. We have to talk about the substances.
You mentioned this earlier, the psychedelic connection. This part is wild.
It is. Thiel is a founder and a major financial backer of companies like Atai Life Sciences. These are biotech firms heavily invested in researching and producing psychedelics, magic mushrooms, psilocybin, things that fundamentally alter human consciousness.
And carp. the zany co-founder of Palantir.
Karp is, well, you look at his interviews, his erratic behavior, the wild hair, the intense staring. The critical source from Radio-MANNADORO looks at this and suggests these guys aren't just high on power. They might be literally high. They are researching these mind-altering substances, they are producing them, and they are promoting them.
So you have a group of billionaires who are potentially tripping on proprietary experimental psychedelics while building the military infrastructure to watch the entire planet and giving secret speeches about the Antichrist.
It sounds like the plot of a cyberpunk horror movie. But the critics say it explains the Kali Yuga vibe, this feeling of absolute absurdity. The people running the global asylum are experimenting with their own consciousness while telling us how to live. The source literally calls it a creepy clown show.
A creepy clown show. That is a brutal takedown. And the critical source also mentions this phrase, the abyss is looking on them anyway.
That is perhaps the most chilling line in the whole critique. It suggests that deep down, despite the billions in the bunkers, these guys are terrified. They aren't gods. They are just men who are staring into the abyss of the future, a future they actively helped break, and they are scared of what is looking back at them. They are building compounds in New Zealand. They are researching ways to upload their brains. They are desperate to survive their own creations.
So the Antichrist speech isn't a magnanimous warning to us. It is a projection of his own intense fear.
It's a confession wrapped in a lecture. He knows what's coming because he built the machine that's bringing it. And he is terrified that the machine doesn't have an off switch.
So he sells the disease with Palantir, and then he sells the cure with his philosophy, or maybe his next biotech startup. And meanwhile, he is creating a zombie apocalypse of intellectual stagnation where the public just nods along because we are too distracted by our phones to notice the cage being built.
That is the complete snake oil critique. And frankly, it is really hard to argue with. When you see the money trail and the behavioral patterns, the high philosophy starts to look an awful lot like cynical marketing.
Okay, so let's assume for a moment that the critic from Radio-MANNADORO is 100% right and Thiel is a grifter. Does that mean the warning itself is wrong?
That is the tricky part of this whole analysis. A broken clock is right twice a day, and a snake oil salesman might still be right about the fact that you are sick. Even if Thiel is purely cynical, the antichrist dynamic he describes, that terrible trade-off between safety and freedom, is very real.
So what is his advice? If we strip away the hypocrisy, what does he actually tell the young, influential people in that room to do about it?
His advice is surprisingly old school. He tells them they must integrate life with history and knowledge.
That sounds suspiciously like read a book.
It's a bit deeper than that. He is telling them to actively reject postmodern MTV incoherence.
MTV incoherence. That feels a bit dated. Does he know MTV just plays reruns of reality shows now?
It's his shorthand for the fragmented TikTok brain style of media consumption where nothing connects to anything else, where everything is just a 15-second clip of noise without context. Thiel is saying you cannot resist a totalizing state if you cannot think in long form. If you don't know history, you will be easily stampeded by fear.
Because if you don't know that this has happened before, that governments always use emergencies to grab power, you will fall for it every single time.
Exactly. If you don't recognize the historical pattern, you step right into the trap. You need logos, actual reason, continuity, historical grounding to fight the Antichrist.
Chapman summarizes Thiel's warnings into 4 main buckets. Let's run through these because I think they are the practical takeaway from this whole fever dream. Let's start with warning number 1.
Warning number 1. Existential risk panic justifies emergency powers. Think about COVID. Think about the post-9/11 Patriot Act. When people are scared of dying, they willingly sign away their civil rights. Thiel says this temporary state will become permanent. We will live in a state of permanent emergency to justify permanent government control.
Warning number 2.
Warning number 2. Global governance requires total surveillance. This relates to the vulnerable world hypothesis. If a single person in a basement can engineer a supervirus that kills millions, then the government will argue they need to watch every single basement, every single Petri dish, every single email, everywhere, forever.
That is terrifying. Because technically the premise is true. One guy with the right tech could do a lot of damage now. But the solution, watching everyone forever, literally creates a prison planet.
That is the ultimate trade-off. Warning number 3, the Antichrist will sound like a good person.
The Helvetica t-shirt, I'm here to help.
Exactly. Do not look for a cartoon villain. Look for the person promising to end all human suffering, to fix the climate, to cure all diseases, if you just give them the absolute keys to the kingdom.
And warning number 4.
Warning number 4. Stagnation makes people crave authoritarian safety. If your life isn't getting better, if you feel like the future is bleak and your kids will be poorer than you stop caring about abstract concepts like freedom and democracy. You just want someone to make the trains run on time. You want a guarantee of basic survival.
So, we are being squeezed from both sides. Fear of the apocalypse pushes us toward total control, and the lack of economic progress makes us too weak and desperate to resist it.
That is the bleak picture he paints in those closed-door meetings. And whether he is the savior trying to warn us or the villain trying to profit from it, that picture looks an awful lot like the world we are living in right now.
This has been incredibly intense. We have gone from uranium mines in Africa to the end times in Silicon Valley and sprinkled in some billionaire psychedelics for good measure.
It is a massive amount of weirdness to process.
So, what is the final verdict for the listener? Is Peter Thiel, a philosopher king, trying to genuinely save us from his own dark inventions? Or is he a cynical operator playing both sides of the apocalypse while selling the software to make it happen?
I think the most honest answer is found in the abyss the critic mentioned. These men are riding a tiger. They built the tiger. They are feeding the tiger. And they are warning us that the tiger is getting hungry. But they can't get off the tiger, or it will eat them too.
So we are all just sitting in the stands watching the show.
We are captive in the audience. The Kali Yuga circus is in town, and we all bought tickets.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought. We have talked a lot about the antichrist system selling itself as safety and peace.
The ultimate irresistible sales pitch.
So ask yourself this tonight. What freedoms are you currently willing to trade for a solid guarantee of safety? If someone offered you a world with zero crime, zero disease, and zero existential risk, but the catch was they had to watch everything you did forever to ensure it, would you take the deal?
And more importantly, who holds the receipt for that transaction? Because once you sell that freedom, there is no refund policy. And the guy holding the receipt might just be the creepy guy who built the prison in the first place.
Check your own data points, everyone. And maybe read a heavy history book instead of scrolling TikTok tonight. We will see you in the next deep dive.
Stay curious and stay critical.